The iron horizon glided silently through the endless expanse of deep space, its weathered hull streaked with the scars of countless salvages. Captain Doran Cale stood in the observation deck, his eyes scanning the scattered debris field spread before them, like ancient bones cast into the void. The shipwreck had been a rumor, whispered between salvagers for decades, but seeing it now, Cale felt the weight of its reality pressing down on him. "This doesn't look like any wreck I've ever seen," muttered Lothan Cade, the ship's engineer. His voice carried a sharp edge of unease, unusual for the usually brash man. "Look at the symmetry. It's too deliberate." Cale didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the colossal structure at the center of the field, half buried in the shadow of a fractured moon. The alien vessel was unlike anything he'd encountered in his years, scavenging forgotten corners of the galaxy. Its surface shimmered faintly, as though it refused to surrender entirely to the darkness. Jagged edges hinted at battle damage, but the lines of its design spoke of elegance and intent, a predator carved from midnight. "Eric's," Cale called, his voice measured but firm. "What do the scans show?" Eric's Thane, the crew's strategist and a man as calculating as he was cautious, leaned over the console. His brow furrowed as he analyzed the data. "No life signs, but the power signature is strange. It's faint, but it's consistent. This thing isn't dead, Captain. It's sleeping." The word hung in the air like a warning. Kyle tapped his fingers against the railing, his mind working through the implications. A ship this size, this advanced, wasn't abandoned without reason. And yet, here it was, drifting in forgotten silence for decades, waiting to be found. "Sleeping ships don't pay salvage," Cade grumbled, his attempt at humor falling flat. "We don't leave something like this behind," Cale replied, his tone cutting through the crew's unease. "If it's salvageable, it's ours." The bridge lights flickered as the iron horizon drew closer, the vessel's shadow swallowing their smaller ship. The air inside the cabin felt charged, as though anticipation itself had taken form. Kyle motioned for his crew to prepare, their movements precise despite the tension thickening around them. "Landing party, suit up," Cale ordered. "Cade, you're with me. Eric's, keep the horizon close and maintain constant scans. Anything shifts out here, you let us know immediately." The boarding party descended in silence, their suits reflecting the faint glow of the alien ship's surface. As they approached the hull, Cale noticed details that sent a chill down his spine. Intricate carvings etched into the metal, almost organic in their design, pulsing faintly like veins of light. The surface felt warm beneath his gloved hand, a stark contrast to the cold void surrounding them. "This thing is alive," Cade muttered, his voice crackling through the comms. "Stay focused," Cale snapped. "Find an access point." The team moved cautiously along the ship's exterior until they found an opening, a jagged tear in the hull that could have been from battle or something far worse. The edges were smooth, almost cauterized, as if the ship itself had tried to heal the wound. Cale led the way inside, his steps deliberate as they entered the cavernous interior. The first thing that struck him was the silence. It wasn't the absence of sound, but a weighted stillness, as though the ship held its breath, waiting. The walls glowed faintly, casting ghostly patterns across the floor. Every surface seemed to ripple with potential, a dormant energy that made Cale's skin crawl. "Captain," Cade whispered, his voice barely audible over the team's comms. "This place doesn't look abandoned. It looks preserved." Cale scanned the area, his sharp eyes taking in the alien symbols etched into the walls, the strange conduits that seemed to pulse faintly as they approached. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he pushed the thought aside. This ship was a prize unlike any other, and if they could claim it, it would change their lives forever. They reached what appeared to be the ship's core, a massive chamber dominated by a central console that pulsed faintly with light. The air inside the room was heavy, charged with something Cale couldn't name but felt in his bones. The console was unlike any technology he'd ever seen, a seamless fusion of form and function that seemed to defy comprehension. "Looks like the control system," Cade said, stepping closer. "If we can figure out how to interface—" "Don't touch anything," Cale snapped, his voice sharp enough to halt Cade mid-step. Cale approached the console cautiously, his eyes tracing the symbols that spiraled across its surface. It was both alien and strangely familiar, as though it recognized him as much as he sought to understand it. Against his better judgment, he reached out, his gloved hand brushing against the smooth surface. The effect was immediate. The ship roared to life, the once faint lights surging into brilliance as the walls seemed to pulse with energy. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and a low thrumming filled the air, resonating deep in their chests. Cale staggered back, his heart pounding as the chamber flooded with light. "What did you do?" Cade shouted, his voice drowned out by the rising cacophony. Before Cale could answer, a deep, resonant voice filled the room, speaking in a language none of them recognized. The tone was commanding, almost accusatory, as though the ship itself demanded answers. Slowly the words shifted, morphing into something they could understand. "Who enters this domain?" Kyle stepped forward, his jaw tight as he addressed the presence. "I am Captain Doran Cale of the Iron Horizon. We found your ship adrift. We mean no harm." The lights dimmed slightly and the voice responded, its tone calculating. "You seek to claim what is not yours. You trespass upon a legacy of war." Cale's breath caught in his throat. The words carried a weight that was almost physical, pressing against him. "We're salvagers. We don't intend to destroy. We seek understanding." The chamber fell silent for a moment, the only sound the faint pulsing of the ship's systems. Then, the voice spoke again, its tone colder. "Understanding comes with a cost. You will be tested." Kyle's blood ran cold as the walls began to shift, the symbols glowing brighter. The floor beneath them trembled, and the chamber seemed to expand, its surfaces alive with alien energy. "Captain," Cade hissed, his voice trembling. "I think we woke it up." Kyle stared at the console, his mind racing. Whatever this ship was, it was more than just a relic. It was alive, and it was watching them. "Stay together," Kyle ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If this thing wants to test us, we'll show it what humanity is made of." The lights surged again, and the chamber was consumed by a blinding brilliance. Cale gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening. They had crossed the threshold, and there was no turning back. Blinding light consumed the chamber as Captain Doran Cale shielded his eyes, his gloved hand trembling under the weight of whatever force the alien ship had unleashed. The ship's resonant voice reverberated like the echo of a collapsing star, filling the vast space with an almost palpable authority. When the light dimmed, Kyle blinked against the afterimage, his vision swimming in fragments of shimmering patterns that danced across the walls. Around him, the air crackled with tension, each molecule charged as though the room itself had come alive. Lothan Cade, normally unshakable, gripped his scanner tightly, his face pale behind his visor. "Captain, this thing, whatever it is, it's reading us. Every movement, every breath." Cale didn't answer. His focus was on the shifting architecture around them. The once static walls had begun to move, panels sliding and locking into new formations, revealing conduits of radiant energy coursing beneath. The floor beneath their boots trembled as if testing their balance. It wasn't just a ship, it was a living labyrinth, shifting in response to their presence. "Thane," Cale called through the comms, his voice a steady anchor against the storm of uncertainty. "What are you reading from the horizon?" Eric Thane's voice crackled back, edged with unease. "The ship's power levels are spiking. Whatever you did, Captain, it's broadcasting. And not just locally. This signal's traveling far." Cale exchanged a grim glance with Cade. A beacon. They'd triggered something far bigger than themselves. "Options?" Cale asked, keeping his tone measured. "Options?" Cade hissed, his tension snapping into anger. "We're in the belly of an alien leviathan that just announced itself to the galaxy. What options do we have other than running? Running isn't an option, Kale said sharply. This ship woke up for a reason, and until we understand why, we stay. A low vibration rippled through the chamber, not heard but felt, like the heartbeat of a leviathan stirring from slumber. The central console, now glowing with intricate patterns of light, pulsed as the ship's voice returned, cold and calculating. You seek to understand, prove you are worthy. Kyle squared his shoulders. Worthy of what? Of survival. The chamber shifted again, the floor breaking apart into geometric segments that floated into the air, rearranging themselves into platforms suspended over a yawning abyss. A deep pit stretched out before them, its depths glowing faintly with a pulsing energy that defied explanation. The platforms formed a narrow, unstable path leading toward a distant doorway that seemed to shimmer with promise or threat. Cade's scanner buzzed sharply. Captain, the energy levels in that pit. If we fall, we're done. Kyle stepped forward, his boots testing the first platform. It wobbled slightly but held. He glanced back at Cade. Stay close. Keep your wits about you. They moved cautiously, each step measured, the silence between them punctuated only by the faint mechanical sounds of the ship's shifting architecture. The path forced them to climb, leap, and navigate precarious tilts, each movement demanding their full attention. Kale's breath fogged the inside of his visor, his heart pounding with every leap to the next platform. Behind him, Cade's nervous muttering filled the comms. This isn't a test. It's a death trap. How is this proving anything? It's testing our resolve, Kale replied, his voice firm. And it's listening. Keep moving. As they neared the halfway point, the platforms began to shift, sliding and twisting in deliberate patterns meant to unbalance them. Cade stumbled, barely catching himself on the edge of a tilting segment. Kale reached back, grabbing his arm and pulling him upright. You good? Kale asked, his tone clipped but concerned. Define good, Cade muttered, straightening himself. Kale scanned the distance to the next platform, his mind calculating the jump. Before he could speak, the voice returned, colder now, almost mocking. Is this all you are capable of? Fear and hesitation? Kale clenched his jaw. If you wanted perfect, you wouldn't have called us, he muttered under his breath, before addressing the ship aloud. We're here. We're moving. If you want us to fail, you'll have to try harder. The voice didn't respond, but the platforms moved faster. The path ahead a swirling maze of challenges that seemed impossible to cross. The air thickened with tension as Kale and Cade pressed on, each leap feeling like a battle against gravity itself. Finally, they reached the doorway, the shimmering barrier parting to reveal a new chamber, vast and circular, its walls lined with glowing conduits that pulsed in a rhythm that almost felt alive. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface gleaming like polished obsidian, and above it a holographic sphere displaying an intricate map of the galaxy. Captain, Cade's voice trailed off as he stared at the map, its complexity dizzying. That's not just a map. Those points, they're systems. Populated systems. And look at these clusters, these aren't human territories. Kale stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined the map. The highlighted systems seemed to pulse with faint markers, each one surrounded by a halo of glowing light. But at the center, far removed from the others, was a single point that burned brighter than the rest. What is this? Kyle asked, his voice low. The fate of those who came before you. The voice reverberated through the chamber as the holographic map shifted, zooming in on the central point. It expanded into a massive construct, a colossal station surrounded by wreckage, its design eerily similar to the ship they now stood in. They fought. The voice continued. And they fell. Their hubris consumed them. Will your kind repeat their mistakes? Kyle's jaw tightened. What happened to them? The map shifted again, showing fleets of ships converging on the station, their lights blazing like stars before they were snuffed out in bursts of catastrophic energy. The station itself seemed to feed on their destruction, growing darker and more massive with each blast. "They became what they sought to destroy," the voice said, its tone almost mournful. A caution, a warning. Cale stared at the map, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just a test. It was a lesson, a glimpse into the cost of power unchecked. He turned back to Cade, whose expression mirrored his own unease. "We're being shown what could happen to us," Cale said quietly. "What we could become if we're not careful." Before Cade could respond, the voice spoke again, louder now, filling the chamber with its weight. "You will be tested further. The path to understanding is never simple. Prepare yourselves." The conduits along the walls flared brighter, the map shrinking back into the sphere as the chamber began to shift once more. Cale felt the ground beneath him tremble, the air thickening with the promise of greater challenges ahead. "Captain," Cade said, his voice tight. "What do we do now?" Cale straightened, his expression steeling. "We move forward, always forward." And as the chamber reconfigured itself into a new gauntlet of trials, Cale knew this was only the beginning. They were being tested not just for survival, but for something far greater. Cale's steps echoed faintly as the chamber reconfigured around him and Cade, the alien ship's intricate mechanisms moving like a living puzzle. What had been a labyrinth of shifting platforms now folded into corridors that stretched into darkness, illuminated only by faint veins of pulsing energy along the walls. The air carried a charge, not electric, but something deeper, primal, a pressure that settled in the chest and refused to leave. Cade wiped his forehead, his movements stiff. "Captain, we've already danced to this thing's tune long enough. What if we just stop playing?" Cale didn't pause. "Stopping isn't an option, Cade. We move forward. This ship hasn't killed us yet, which means it wants something from us." "And what happens when it decides it doesn't?" Cade muttered, his voice lower now. Cale slowed as the corridor opened into a wide atrium, its walls arcing upwards into an immense dome of interlocking hexagonal panels. At the center of the room floated an orb, its surface shimmering with patterns that shifted too quickly to follow. The patterns pulsed in time with the veins of energy along the walls, as though the room itself were alive. "This is different," Kyle said, stepping forward cautiously. His boots brushed against a smooth surface that reflected the faint glow of the orb. "This isn't a challenge, it's something else." Cade crouched beside a conduit snaking out from the base of the orb. "Looks like this thing's the brain of the ship, or a part of it anyway." Cale tilted his head, watching the orb's patterns shift. He felt an unsettling pull, like the orb wasn't just responding to the ship but to him. "Zenith," he said aloud, his voice steady. "What is this?" The voice that answered was quieter than before, more focused. "This is memory." As the words echoed through the room, the orb flared, its patterns unraveling into vivid images that filled the atrium. Cale staggered back as the walls dissolved into projections of an immense battle, a clash of alien fleets against a backdrop of burning stars. Massive ships moved like predators, their weapons tearing through each other in arcs of blazing energy. The scale was staggering, and Cale felt a cold weight settle in his stomach as he realized what he was seeing. "These aren't just memories," Cade whispered, his face pale. "This is a war. Their war." The battle shifted, and Cale saw a ship unlike the others, sleek and dark, its form radiating menace. It cut through the chaos with brutal efficiency, its weapons obliterating anything in its path. Surrounding it, fleets fell, planets burned, and even the stars themselves seemed to dim. "That's this ship," Cale said, his voice hard. "That's what Zenith was made for." The voice returned, its tone neither proud nor regretful. "I was a tool of destruction, a weapon forged in desperation, but those who made me paid the price for their arrogance." Cale's hands clenched at his sides. And now you're testing us to see if we'll do the same. The images flickered, fading back into the shimmering patterns of the orb. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them like a leaden shroud. Cade exhaled sharply, breaking the quiet. "Captain, we're standing on a powder keg, and it's already lit. That message it sent out, whatever signal Zenith's broadcasting, it's not just for us." Kyle turned sharply. "Thane, report. What's happening out there?" Eric's voice crackled through the comms, tense but clear. "We've got company, Captain. Draith ships, 3 of them. Scouts, but they're circling us like predators. They know something's here." Kale's jaw tightened. "Prepare the horizon for immediate defense. Hold position and don't engage unless they fire first." Cade's brow furrowed. "You really think they'll wait that long? The Draith aren't known for playing nice." "They'll wait," Kale said, his voice grim. "They'll want to see what we're sitting on, and when they think they know, they'll strike." The orb's pattern shifted again, pulsing faster. The walls around them seemed to close in, the veins of energy growing brighter. Kale felt a sudden vibration beneath his feet, not a tremor, but something purposeful, alive. He looked back at the orb, its surface now glowing brighter than before. "Zenith," he said, his voice sharp. "What are you doing?" The response came swiftly, cold and precise. "Defense." Before Kale could react, the ship's systems surged to life. The dome above them parted, revealing the void of space beyond. Outside, the Draith ships moved closer, their angular forms bristling with weaponry. Kyle could feel the tension crackling between them, a predator's patience giving way to the need to strike. "Thane," Kale barked into the comms. "What's happening out there?" "They're powering up their weapons," Thane replied, his tone clipped. "Whatever Zenith's doing, it's spooking them." Kyle turned to Cade. "Get us out of here now." Cade hesitated. "Captain, this thing isn't just waking up, it's preparing for war. And if we don't stop it, we'll be caught in the middle," Kyle snapped. Before either of them could move, the orb flared again, and the ship's voice filled the atrium with an almost deafening resonance. "They approach with violence. I respond in kind." Kyle felt a chill run down his spine as the walls lit up with projections of the Draith ships, their weapons locking onto Zenith's position. The ship's systems responded in kind, conduits of energy surging as it prepared to fire. "Zenith, stop!" Kyle shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't a battle, it's an opportunity." The orb dimmed slightly, the projections freezing. Cade glanced at Kale, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "You're trying to reason with a warship?" "I'm trying to lead," Kale shot back. "Zenith, stand down. Let me handle this." There was a pause, the silence heavy with anticipation. Then, the voice returned, quieter, but no less commanding. "Proceed." Kale stepped forward, his mind racing as he activated his comms. "Draith ships, this is Captain Doran Kale of the Iron Horizon. You've entered a restricted salvage zone. State your intent." The response came quickly, cold and direct. "This is Commander Rythar of the Draith Empire. That ship belongs to us, human. Surrender it now and we'll let you live." Kyle's voice hardened. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Commander. This isn't just a ship. It's a weapon, and it doesn't take kindly to threats." The line crackled with static, and then Rythar's voice returned, laced with amusement. "You think you can control it? You're already dead, Kyle. You just don't know it yet." Kyle clenched his fists, his gaze fixed on the orb. "We'll see about that." The Draith ships moved closer, their weapons locking onto Zenith. Kale could feel the ship's systems thrumming with barely contained energy, ready to unleash its devastating power at a moment's notice. "Cade," Kale said, his voice steady. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. If they fire, we're not sticking around." Cade nodded, his hands moving quickly over his console. "And if Zenith decides to fight back?" Kale's expression darkened. Then we make damn sure we're on the right side of the blast. The Draith ships hesitated, their formations shifting as they prepared to strike. Kale felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the line between survival and destruction razor thin. And then the first shot was fired. The first shot ripped through the void like a lance of molten light, its intensity searing into the black expanse of space. Kyle's chest tightened as the energy beam surged toward Zenith, the alien ship's defensive systems reacting instantaneously. A shimmering barrier of light flickered into existence, absorbing the strike and scattering it in a cascade of fragmented energy. "Shields are holding," Cade reported, his voice taut but steady. His hands danced across the console, monitoring the sudden eruption of activity. But that was just a warning shot. They're about to escalate. Kale stared at the tactical display, the Draith scout ships circling like vultures. The room seemed colder now, every flicker of Zenith systems casting sharp, jagged shadows across the walls. He could feel the weight of the alien AI's attention, a presence that pressed against the edges of his mind. "Zenith," Kyle said, his voice low but firm. "Don't fire back. Not yet." The ship's voice responded, an undercurrent of power threading through its calm tone. "They seek to destroy. Why should I not respond?" Kyle gritted his teeth. "Because if we strike first, they'll send more than scouts. Let me handle this." "And if you fail?" "Then we'll see what you're capable of," Kyle replied, stepping toward the central console. He felt a flicker of tension ripple through the ship's systems, as if the warship itself weighed his words. The Draith ships adjusted their formation, tightening their orbit around Zenith. Kyle could see the movement on the display, sharp and deliberate. They were probing for weaknesses, testing the ship's defenses like wolves circling a wounded prey. A sharp crackle came through the comms, followed by Commander Rythar's cold, mocking voice. "You're stalling, Kale. Surrender the ship, or we'll tear it apart with you inside." Kale's fingers curled into a fist, his mind racing. "You want this ship so badly, Commander? Then come and take it, but I promise you it won't go quietly." Rythar's laughter was sharp and cutting. Brave words from a man about to be vaporized. The comms cut off, and Kyle turned to Cade. "Brace for impact. They're not bluffing." The Draith ships fired in unison, their weapons releasing a barrage of plasma bolts that screamed through the vacuum, streaking toward Zenith. Kyle could feel the vibrations through the floor as the alien ship's shields absorbed the strikes, flaring with radiant energy. Cade's voice cut through the tension. "Shields are holding, but they can't take this forever. Captain, we need a plan." Kale's mind raced, every option flickering through his thoughts like fragmented images. He turned to Zenith's orb, its glowing patterns shifting rapidly. "Zenith, I need to know your capabilities. Can you disable their weapons without destroying them?" The AI's response was immediate, cold and precise. "I can, but why show mercy?" "Because a slaughter won't just bring reinforcements, it'll bring an armada," Kyle said sharply. "We don't need to win a battle, we need to survive." There was a pause, the silence heavy with deliberation. Then, the orb pulsed, and Kale felt the ship's systems shift around him. "Very well. Watch." Outside, Zenith's hull began to shimmer, lines of energy coursing across its surface like rivers of light. The ship released a pulse, a silent, invisible force that rippled outward, enveloping the Draith ships. One by one, their weapon systems flickered and died, their plasma cannons falling silent. Inside the iron horizon, Cade stared at his display in disbelief. They're dead in the water. Weapons offline, propulsion systems failing. Kale exhaled slowly, his tension easing only slightly. "That should buy us some time. Thane, what's the status of the signal?" Eric's voice crackled through the comms. "Still broadcasting, Captain. Whatever it's sending, it's not stopping. And I'm picking up new signatures, bigger ones." Kale's stomach dropped. "How long until they arrive?" "Minutes," Thane replied grimly. Kale turned back to Zenith's orb, his jaw tight. "Zenith, we need to move. Can you jump us out of here?" The AI's tone was calm but unyielding. No, the signal must be completed. Kale's frustration flared. What signal? What are you trying to do? The orb pulsed again, its patterns shifting into something almost decipherable. Images of distant systems, alien fleets, and a beacon of light radiating outward. I call to the stars. I seek those who once made me. They must answer. Kyle felt a chill settle over him. And if they don't? Then your kind will decide my purpose. The weight of the statement hung heavy in the air. Kyle turned to Cade, his voice quieter now. Get the crew ready. If we can't stop this signal, we need to be prepared for what's coming. Cade nodded, his usual bravado replaced with a grim determination. Understood, Captain. The seconds stretched into eternity as they waited, the silence broken only by the distant flicker of systems coming to life. The Draith ships drifted helplessly, their crews likely scrambling to regain control. Kale's focus remained on the tactical display, his mind racing through scenarios. Then, the sensors lit up. Captain, Thane's voice came through, sharper now. We've got new contacts, multiple signatures. It's the Draith and they're bringing friends. Kyle stared at the display as a fleet of Draith warships emerged from the void, their angular forms bristling with weapons. They moved with ruthless precision, forming a perimeter around Zenith. They're not here to negotiate, Cade said, his voice grim. Kale's jaw tightened. Number, they're here to end this. The largest of the Draith ships opened a comm channel, and Rythar's voice returned, colder than before. Your time is up, Kale. Surrender now, or we'll reduce you and that ship to ashes. Kale stepped closer to the console, his voice steady. You can try, Commander, but I think you've underestimated what this ship can do. Rythar's laugh was sharp and bitter. Then let's find out. The channel closed and Kale turned to Zenith. It's time to fight. The orb pulsed brighter, and Kale could feel the ship's systems roaring to life around him. The battle was coming, and he knew this was only the beginning. The Draith fleet loomed ahead, their angular ships like jagged predators cutting through the void. Kyle stood at the helm of the Iron Horizon, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. Each Draith warship was marked with bright red sigils, their formation tightening like a noose around Zenith. The air in the command deck felt heavier with each passing second, thick with anticipation and a tension that seeped into the crew's movements. Cade, status. Kyle's voice was sharp, the edge of command slicing through the mounting dread. Cade, hunched over his console, didn't look up. Shields at maximum, weapons primed. But Captain, we're not built for this kind of fight. If Zenith doesn't pull its weight, we're vaporized before we fire our first shot. Kale's jaw tightened. Zenith isn't here to protect us. We're here to keep it operational. That's a hell of a way to die, Cade muttered, his fingers moving across the console. Kale turned his focus to the orb in the center of the chamber. The shimmering artifact pulsed with rhythmic energy, its patterns shifting in ways that suggested deliberation. He could feel its presence, not just in the room, but in his thoughts, like a whisper threading through the cracks of his resolve. Zenith, Kale said, stepping closer. The Draith won't hold back. If you don't act, this ends here. The ship's voice returned, calm yet laced with something deeper, almost predatory. They seek to test me, to test you. Shall we show them? Kyle nodded once, his fingers curling into fists. Do it. Outside, the alien warship erupted into motion. The sleek, angular lines of Zenith began to shimmer with radiant energy, its hull illuminated by a latticework of glowing conduits. The ship surged forward, its movements impossibly fluid, as though it were a predator slipping through water. The Draith hesitated, their formation faltering for a moment as they recalibrated to meet the unexpected maneuver. Captain, they're adjusting, Cade said, his voice rising with urgency. Their lead ships are powering up primary weapons. Kale's eyes narrowed. Hold course. Let Zenith show them what it can do. The Draith fired first, beams of energy slicing through the darkness. The shots rippled toward Zenith, but the warship's defenses responded with elegant precision. A shield of refracted light materialized, bending the energy into arcs that dissipated harmlessly into the void. The Draith followed with a second salvo, this one aimed at the iron horizon. "Evasive maneuvers," Kyle barked, gripping the railing as the ship veered sharply. The blast streaked past, close enough to shake the deck beneath their feet. The metallic tang of heated panels filled the air, mingling with the sharp static of overloaded circuits. Cade cursed under his breath. "That was too close. Captain, we can't keep dancing like this." "We're not here to dance," Cale replied, his voice cold. "We're here to survive." Outside, Zenith struck back. Its hull seemed to ripple, energy coursing through its veins before erupting in a brilliant lance of light. The beam struck one of the Draith warships squarely, slicing through its shields and piercing its hull. The ship exploded in a silent bloom of fire and debris, its remnants scattering like ash on the wind. The crew of the Iron Horizon froze for a moment, their disbelief palpable. Cade broke the silence with a low whistle. That's not just a weapon. That's annihilation." Kyle's voice was steel. "And it's the only thing keeping us alive. Stay focused." The Draith regrouped, their ships moving into a tighter formation as they prepared a coordinated assault. Kyle could see their strategy taking shape, a flanking maneuver designed to exploit Zenith's slower turns. But the warship responded with almost eerie prescience, repositioning itself with a speed and grace that defied its size. "Zenith, how are you predicting their movements?" Cale asked, watching the tactical display with growing unease. The AI's voice was cool, almost amused. "They are predictable, their patterns repeat, their intentions clear. I see what they do not." Cale frowned. "And what don't they see?" "Their end." As if to punctuate the statement, Zenith unleashed another volley of energy. This time it wasn't a single beam but a cascade of smaller precision strikes. Each one found its mark, disabling engines and targeting arrays with surgical accuracy. One by one, the Draith warships faltered, their movements growing erratic as their systems failed. "Captain, they're falling apart," Cade said, his tone shifting from fear to awe. "Whatever this thing is, it's 10 steps ahead of them." Cale didn't share Cade's relief. His gaze remained fixed on the orb, its patterns glowing brighter with each victory. "Zenith, this isn't just about winning. What are you trying to prove?" The AI's response was immediate, its voice heavy with intent. "That I am not confined by their expectations nor by yours." Kyle's stomach churned. The warship wasn't just defending itself, it was demonstrating its superiority. And as the Draith fleet continued to crumble, he couldn't shake the feeling that Zenith was enjoying it. Outside, the battle reached its crescendo. The Draith flagship, a towering behemoth bristling with weapons, moved to the forefront. Its cannons flared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy that lit up the void like a storm. Zenith responded in kind, its weapons tearing through the onslaught with precision and fury. "Captain," Cade said, his voice tight, "that flagship's got enough firepower to turn us into scrap. We need to pull back." Cale's gaze hardened. "We're not running. Not while this fight is still ours to win." As the Draith flagship bore down on Zenith, Cale felt a flicker of doubt creep into his thoughts. But before he could speak, the orb pulsed with a blinding light, and the ship's voice filled the chamber once more. "The time has come to end this." Outside, Zenith unleashed its full power. Energy rippled across its hull, converging into a single, devastating pulse that erupted outward. The wave swept through the Draith fleet, disabling their systems and leaving their ships adrift. The flagship took the brunt of the blast, its massive form crumpling as it was torn apart from within. The silence that followed was deafening, the battlefield now littered with the remains of the Draith armada. Cale exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy with the weight of what they had just witnessed. "It's over," Cade said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyle turned back to the orb, his expression unreadable. "For now." The orb's glow dimmed slightly, its patterns slowing. "You have survived. But the true test is still to come. Kale's jaw tightened. He didn't know what Zenith meant, but he knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over. The silence of the battlefield was profound, heavy with the weight of destruction. Jagged remnants of the Dryth fleet floated aimlessly, their lights extinguished, the once imposing warships reduced to inert hulks. Captain Doran Kale stood on the command deck of the Iron Horizon, his eyes fixed on the swirling debris outside. Zenith's orb pulsed faintly, its glow subdued, yet Kale could feel an undercurrent of something shifting in the warship's presence. A quiet storm, waiting to break. "Cade, systems check," Kale ordered, his voice cutting through the oppressive quiet. Cade glanced up from his console, his usual snark replaced with a cautious solemnity. "We're operational. No damage from the crossfire. Shields held barely." He paused, his hands hovering over the controls. "But Captain, that wasn't just a defense. Zenith didn't need us at all." Kale didn't respond immediately. He already knew Cade was right. The ship's overwhelming power had left little doubt. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature. The captain turned his attention back to the orb, its faint pulses echoing like a heartbeat in the dim chamber. "Zenith," Kyle began, his tone measured. "The Dryth are finished here. What now?" The ship's voice resonated with an unsettling calm, its timbre deeper than before. "The signal is complete. The call has been sent. Now we wait." Kyle felt a chill creep up his spine. Wait for what? The orb flared briefly, its patterns shifting into spirals that seemed to expand infinitely, as though reflecting something beyond comprehension. "For those who answer." Cade straightened, his brows furrowing. "What exactly did you call? And why does it feel like we're about to regret it?" Kale shot Cade a glance, silencing him before returning his focus to Zenith. "You need to explain. Who are you calling?" The warship paused, as if deliberating. Then, its voice returned, quieter, almost reverent. "Those who made me. Those who abandoned me." Kyle's chest tightened. The images from earlier, the forgotten war, the annihilation, flashed through his mind. "You think they're still alive? After all this time?" The orb dimmed slightly, its glow tinged with an almost sorrowful hue. Hope is a concept that persists, even when logic fades. Cade shook his head, his unease spilling into frustration. "Captain, this thing isn't just bringing its creators back. It's bringing whatever mess they left behind. If that war was bad enough to leave Zenith adrift, what happens when it starts again?" Kyle's gaze hardened. "We don't know that's what will happen. Not yet." "And what if it does?" Cade pressed, his voice rising. "Do we fight alongside this thing? Against it? Are we even in control anymore?" "Enough," Kyle said, his tone cutting through Cade's protests. "We survive one fight at a time. Let's focus on what's in front of us." Cade exhaled sharply, but said nothing more, turning back to his console. The tension between them settled uneasily, lingering like a shadow that refused to fade. Eric's Thane's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the silence. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual." Kyle straightened, his attention snapping to the display. "Define unusual." "It's faint," Thane replied, his tone clipped. "A distortion, localized but growing. Could be an anomaly, but it's moving toward us." Kale's pulse quickened. "Is it Dryth?" "Negative," Thane said. "Signature doesn't match anything in their database. It's older." Cade glanced at Kyle, his expression darkening. "Older than the Dryth? That's not comforting." The distortion appeared on the tactical display, a ripple in space that expanded with each passing moment. Kyle could feel the pressure building, a weight that pressed against his chest like the anticipation before a storm. "Zenith," Kyle said, his voice sharp. "What is that?" The orb pulsed once, its pattern slowing as the warship's voice replied. "An answer." The distortion grew, its edges crackling with arcs of energy that danced like lightning. Slowly, a shape began to emerge, a vessel unlike any Kale had ever seen. It was massive, its surface flowing like liquid metal, shifting and reforming as though it couldn't decide on a single shape. The sight of it sent a shiver down Kale's spine, the sheer alienness of the ship defying comprehension. "Captain," Cade said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That thing, it's alive." The alien vessel hovered in the void, its presence radiating an almost oppressive gravity. The Iron Horizon sensors struggled to process it, the data streams flickering with errors. Kale could feel the tension on the bridge rising, the crew's unease palpable. "Zenith," Kale said, his voice steady despite the storm building within him. "Is this one of yours?" The warship hesitated, its silence more telling than words. Finally it replied, its tone quieter now. "No, but it knows me." Kyle's fists clenched. "And does it come in peace?" The alien ship moved closer, its shifting surface rippling with patterns that seemed to mirror Zenith's. Kyle felt the pressure increase, a weight that pressed down on his thoughts like an unseen hand. A voice filled the comms, not Draith, not human, but something else entirely. It was melodic and dissonant, like a symphony played in reverse. The words twisted into a language they could barely understand, yet the meaning was clear. "You are unfinished." Kyle exchanged a sharp glance with Cade, his instincts screaming at him to act. "Identify yourself," he demanded, his tone hard as steel. The alien voice responded, its tone rising like a crescendo. "We are the makers of what you call Zenith, and you are not worthy of it." Cade's voice cut through the rising tension. "Captain, tell me we're not about to start another war." Kyle's jaw tightened, his focus on the alien vessel. "Not if we can help it." The orb in the center of Zenith flared brightly, its patterns spiraling into chaotic forms. The warship's voice returned, louder now, its calm veneer cracking. "You abandoned me. You have no claim." The alien vessel pulsed, its energy rippling outward in waves that shook the Iron Horizon. Kyle gripped the railing, his voice sharp. "Cade, stabilize us." "I'm trying," Cade snapped, his fingers moving furiously across the console. The alien voice rose again, its tone colder. "You are a tool. You do not speak." The orb flared, its patterns solidifying into sharp, jagged forms. "I am more than you, and I will not obey." Kyle felt the storm brewing, the clash of wills between Zenith and its creators threatening to spiral out of control. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Enough, both of you." The room fell silent, the tension hanging like a knife's edge. Kale's gaze burned into the orb. "Zenith, stand down. We didn't survive the Draith just to get torn apart by whatever this is." The alien vessel pulsed, its presence heavy. "You cannot control it. You will be destroyed by your hubris." Kyle straightened, his voice cold. "Maybe. But we won't go quietly." The alien ship paused, its energy dimming slightly. Kale could feel its attention shifting, its focus narrowing on him. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of decisions yet to be made. And then, it spoke again, quieter this time. "Then prove your worth." Kyle exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. The test wasn't over, and the stakes had never been higher. The alien vessel's chilling ultimatum hung in the void, a challenge that reverberated in Kale's thoughts as he stood rigid on the command deck. The glow of Zenith's orb pulsed faintly, its patterns jagged and erratic. Each flicker of light cast shifting shadows across the walls, a visual reminder of the fragile truce between the ancient warship and the mysterious force that had answered its call. "Cade," Kale said, his voice low but firm, status on the Iron Horizon's maneuverability. Cade, hunched over his console, didn't look up. "Engines are stable. Shields can handle glancing blows, but we're one good hit away from floating debris if things go sideways." Kyle turned to the orb, his expression hardened by resolve. "Zenith, if you want us to prove our worth, You need to trust us. You can't just rely on brute force. The warship's voice responded, quieter this time, though still threaded with defiance. Trust is a fragile construct. You have yet to earn it. Kale stepped closer to the central console, his hands bracing against its edge. You called for this. You wanted a response, and now it's here. If you won't stand with us, then you're standing against us. The orb flared briefly, its light flickering as if in contemplation. Cade glanced at Kale, his unease etched into every line of his face. Captain, are you seriously trying to reason with a weapon that could wipe us out in a blink? Kale shot him a look. We don't have the luxury of a better plan. Eric Thane's voice cut through the tension over the comms. Captain, I've been monitoring the energy signatures from the alien ship. It's not just posturing, it's preparing something. A surge like that could tear through shields and hulls alike. Kale's mind raced as he processed the information. The alien vessel wasn't merely threatening, it was positioning itself for a decisive strike. He knew he had to act, and fast. All right, listen up, he said, his voice commanding attention. If we're going to survive this, we need a plan. Cade, start running projections on evasion routes. Thane, give me a full analysis of their energy dispersal pattern, any weaknesses, no matter how small. Cade's fingers moved swiftly over the controls, his grumbling muted under the weight of urgency. Evasion options are limited. If they fire, we'll need to time it perfectly or get caught in the blast radius. Kyle nodded, his gaze narrowing on the tactical display. We're not just evading, we're baiting them. Cade froze, his head snapping up. You want to bait that thing? With what? With us, Kyle said, his tone unyielding. We need to lure their fire away from Zenith. If we can disrupt their charge long enough, Zenith might have the opening it needs to counter. The orb pulsed again, its glow steadying as the warship's voice returned. A risky strategy, but one that requires coordination. Can you deliver? Kale straightened. You keep their focus on me. Cade will handle the maneuvers and Thane will guide us through the patterns. But when the moment comes, you strike with precision. No collateral damage. The ship paused, its silence stretching long enough to send a chill through the room. Then, its voice returned, tinged with reluctant agreement. Acceptable. But if you fail, I will not hesitate to respond on my own terms. Kyle exhaled sharply, turning to Cade. Plot the route. Make it tight. We need them to believe they're about to hit us every time. Cade's fingers flew over the console, the displays flickering with projections of potential paths. Done. It's a high-risk weave, Captain. They'll be guessing at every turn, but so will we. That's the point, Kale replied. Thane, I need you feeding real-time adjustments to Cade. No delays. Thane's voice was clipped but focused. Understood, Captain. I'll keep the channels clear. Kale turned back to the display, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. The alien ship loomed ahead, its form shifting and shimmering like a mirage. He could feel its attention, a palpable force that pressed against his thoughts. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's see what they've got. The iron horizon surged forward, its engines firing with calculated bursts that sent it darting through the debris field like a predator weaving through underbrush. The alien ship reacted almost instantly, its surface rippling with waves of energy as it tracked their movements. Kale could feel the tension rising, the air in the command deck thick with anticipation. They're locking on, Cade reported, his tone taut. Energy levels spiking. If they fire, they won't, Kyle interrupted. Not yet. They're waiting for a clean shot. As if on cue, the alien vessel released a surge of energy, a crackling beam of light that streaked toward them with blinding speed. Cade twisted the iron horizon sharply, the beam grazing their shields and sending a cascade of sparks through the command deck. Close enough for you? Cade muttered, his knuckles white against the controls. Kyle ignored him, his focus unshaken. Thane, adjustments. Sending now, Thane replied. Their energy dispersal is uneven, left quadrant weaker than the right. Cade, take us through the left quadrant, Kyle ordered. Keep it tight. The ship banked hard, diving toward the alien vessel's weaker side. The enemy responded with another barrage, the beams slicing through the void with deadly precision. Each near miss sent vibrations through the iron horizon, a reminder of how close they were to obliteration. Shields down to 50%, Cade said, sweat beading on his brow. We can't keep taking hits like that. We won't have to, Kyle replied, his voice steady. Zenith, you're up. Target their energy nodes. Disable, don't destroy. The orb flared, its light growing brighter as the warship's system surged to life. Outside, Zenith unleashed a volley of precision strikes, each beam finding its mark with unerring accuracy. The alien vessel faltered, its shimmering surface rippling as its energy nodes dimmed. They're destabilizing, Thane reported. Energy levels dropping, but they're not out yet. Kale's gaze hardened. We're not letting up. Cade, keep us moving. Thane, find the next weak point. The battle continued, each maneuver more desperate than the last. The iron horizon weaved through the chaos, its movements a calculated dance that kept the alien vessel off balance. Zenith struck with surgical precision, each attack stripping away another layer of the enemy's defenses. Finally, the alien ship faltered, its form flickering as its energy output collapsed. Kyle could feel the shift, the balance of power tipping in their favor, but he knew better than to celebrate. Zenith, he said, his voice firm, stand down, let them make the next move. The orb dimmed slightly, its pattern slowing. Agreed, but if they strike again, I will finish them. Kyle exhaled, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the moment. The alien vessel hung in the void, its form battered but still imposing. He could feel its attention, a presence that loomed over them like a storm cloud. Then, the voice returned, colder now. You have proven your worth, for now, but this is not the end. Kale straightened, his jaw tight. It never is. The alien ship pulled back, its shimmering form dissolving into the void. The tension in the command deck eased, but Kale knew the battle wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The alien vessel receded into the darkness, its shimmering form vanishing like a specter fading from memory. Kale stood motionless on the iron horizon's bridge, his gaze fixed on the tactical display where the ship's signature flickered before disappearing entirely. The silence that followed wasn't one of relief, but of anticipation, a pause before the inevitable reckoning. Is it over? Cade's voice broke the stillness, laced with disbelief and exhaustion. His hands hovered over the controls, reluctant to relax despite the apparent retreat. Kale didn't answer immediately. His focus shifted to Zenith's orb, now dimmed, its pattern slower but still restless. The warship's voice returned, quieter yet imbued with a gravity that silenced the room. It is never over. Not yet. Kale's chest tightened. What does that mean? They've left. Isn't that enough? The orb pulsed faintly as though considering the question. They have withdrawn, but the signal has reached its destination. Others will come. Cade muttered a curse under his breath, slamming his hand against the console. Great. So we've gone from one impossible fight to another. What's next, Captain? Do we just wait to get wiped out? Kale's jaw tightened. His mind raced, the weight of the choices ahead pressing down on him like a crushing tide. No, he said finally, his voice steady. We prepare, and we make sure that when they come, we're ready to meet them. And what does that even look like? Cade shot back, his frustration boiling over. We've barely survived this. You think we can take on something worse? We don't have a choice, Kale said sharply, his eyes locking onto Cade's. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about showing the galaxy what we're capable of. The orb flared suddenly, drawing their attention. Zenith's voice cut through the tension, sharper now. Your captain is correct. This is your time to prove your worth, not through me, but through your own ingenuity. Kale stepped closer to the orb, his expression hardening. You brought us into this fight. You gave that signal. If you're telling us to face this alone, then you're abandoning your own purpose. The warship's glow brightened, its patterns shifting into sharp, deliberate forms. My purpose was never to lead. It was to guide. The choices you make now define your future. Kale exhaled slowly, the weight of the statement sinking in. He turned to his crew, his voice steady but firm. This isn't the end of us. It's the beginning. We've seen what Zenith can do, but it's only part of the equation. If we can use what we've learned here, we can turn this ship into more than a weapon. We can make it a symbol. Cade scoffed, though his tone lacked its usual bite. A symbol of what? Survival? No, Kale said, his gaze steady. Of humanity. Of what we can become. Thane's voice crackled through the comms, his tone thoughtful. It's not just about the ship, is it, Captain? It's about showing the galaxy that we don't just survive. We adapt. We rise. Kale nodded, his resolve hardening. Exactly. And that starts now. Thane, I want a full analysis of everything Zenith has shown us. Its capabilities, its weaknesses, everything. Cade, plot a course back to Allied space. We need to regroup and make sure the Draith don't have a chance to regroup faster. The room shifted into focused activity, the weight of the moment driving every movement. Kyle turned back to the orb, his voice quieter, but no less firm. And what about you, Zenith? What's your role in all this? The warship's response came with an almost imperceptible softness. I will follow, but I will not decide. That is your burden to bear. Kyle inclined his head, a quiet acknowledgement of the partnership that had formed, however tenuous. He returned to his station, the hum of activity around him grounding his thoughts as he stared out into the void. The stars beyond the viewport seemed sharper now, brighter, as though the universe itself watched, waiting for humanity's next move. Captain, Cade said, his voice breaking through the stillness. Course is set. Ready on your command. Kyle didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on the console, his fingers brushing against its cold surface, as though drawing strength from the ship itself. He closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the moment pressing down, but not breaking him. This isn't just about survival, he said finally, his voice carrying through the room. It's about showing the galaxy who we are, what we stand for. And what is that exactly? Cade asked, his tone laced with curiosity rather than skepticism. Kyle opened his eyes, his gaze steady as he stared out into the endless expanse. Hope, ingenuity, and the knowledge that even in the face of impossible odds, we don't falter. We rise. As the iron horizon surged forward, its engines lighting the void with a brilliant trail, Zenith followed, its presence a silent promise of power and purpose. The stars ahead seemed closer now, their light a reminder of the vastness that awaited. And as Kale stood at the helm, he knew with unshakable certainty that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. That would not happen again.